Well, all right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Hot Seat Automotive Podcast. It's your buddy CJ here. And tonight, we're talking about all things automotive industry, the automotive enthusiast hobby, cars, all the things that real gearheads love talking about. Real Gearhead Talk. This is the place to be for that real gearhead talk. Guys, welcome back to all my subscribers. You know I love and appreciate each and every one of you. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Give me a like and subscribe. Around here, we talk about cars. We talk about exotic cars, classic cars, muscle cars. We talk about the automotive industry. We talk about automotive-themed events and motorsports, road trips, car shows, rallies, auto racing, you name it. We get into a little bit of everything here on the Hot Seat Automotive Podcast channel. I'll tell you what, because we're gearheads. We're car guys, we're car girls from all walks of life, and we're into all kinds of different trucks and cars and vehicles. And let me tell you something, this is what we do. We talk about cars, don't we? When we're not driving them, we're not working on them, we love talking about them. And tonight, guys, I wanted to come on here and get right into it with you. So let's go. Guys, tonight we got a special episode. We're going to talk about 35 years of the Mazda Miata. Are you kidding me? Let's celebrate 35 years of the Mazda Miata. And I want to start off tonight's episode by asking a question. What is a sports car? What is the essence of a sports car? Well, there's probably a bit of a gray area in there, right? And it depends on who you ask. And perhaps there really is no academic, precise answer. But we're going to talk about really as close as we can get to a formal definition, if you will, that all gearheads can agree to, and why Mazda got it right. Right car at the right time. Who would have thought? I don't think a lot of industry insiders and automotive enthusiasts would have placed a bet that Mazda could have pulled off what they did with the Miata coming out in 1989. And guys, 4 generations of the Miata and 35 years, in addition to a decade before that of research and development, and just an incredible history. Let's go ahead and get right into it, because I claim every great story in our automotive hobby has a beginning. And guys, we got to go way back. Where does the story of the Mazda Miata start? And I think if we go back to the conclusion of World War II, globally, young men and women for that matter, families coming out of that, what's known as the greatest generation, the World War II generation, and then into the boomers. But particularly as I think about 1950s, 1960s, okay, in America, in Europe, elsewhere, folks were looking for hobbies. They were looking for some joy and things that they could really, experience the joys and happiness of life post World War II, but also specifically motoring. And I think, generally speaking, 2 roads diverged. One, you could be a motorcycle guy, and the birth of the motorcycling hobby really took off after World War II. We'll save that for another episode. Motorcycle guys, I ain't forgot about you. Your buddy CJ's kind of a motorcycle guy, although I don't claim to be hardcore motorcycle. I love bikes too. I've had a couple. I'll tell those stories soon, I promise. Or the rise of automotive motorsport, the automotive enthusiast hobby, post-World War II, and the birth of a different kind of car, the sports car. What are we talking about here? Look at this thing. The MGB, for example, so iconic. Coming out of England, these 2-seat roadsters. Okay, you had cars from Italy, you had cars from England that really defined this niche in the market, if you will, this new class of car, the sports car. We're talking lightweight, solid performance, fun to drive, typically convertible, right? Soft top convertible, tossable cars that you could get out drive, enjoy life, enjoy the drive, okay? And you didn't have to be super wealthy or rich. These were not Ferraris, okay? These were not high-end exotic cars. These were enthusiast cars. These were achievable, attainable cars, okay? At a price point that were fun to drive, as I mentioned, affordable, okay? As we think about the rise of the sports car, a lot of these cars, including the MGB, it's too bad more of these didn't survive. I think some of these cars, probably a topic for another day, but suffered from quality issues, right? I remember as a kid seeing a lot of these around. A lot of them were up on blocks or they were under tarps with the hoods up and the engines out. Notorious for gremlins and engine problems and all kinds of things. There are survivors and there are guys who are loyal to these and the little Italian variants, the Fiats, the Triumphs, the MGBs, so on and so forth. The list continues. The Lotuses, we'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, but these cars didn't have to be big power cars. These weren't American muscle cars coming out of Detroit with V8s. There's no replacement for displacement. These cars had small, modest power plants, okay, with respectable performance. A key here is that they felt faster than they were. They punched above their weight, and you could have a blast driving them, even though they weren't putting out 300 horsepower. You didn't need it. Wind in your hair, shades on, with your gal or your partner cruising on down the road, cruising the California coast or out on the East Coast. Come on. Weekend jaunts, young men and women coming out of college, enjoying life with a vehicle like this, or older folks looking to, get into the hobby. These were attainable, achievable cars, and they were wildly successful. Cars like this, I claim, kind of peaked around the 50s and 60s. What happened? So is that the end of the story? After the MGB came the Miata and the rest is history? No. 1970s happened. The 1970s killed the sports car. Real talk. We got that real talk. Come on, let's get into it. Oil crisis. Okay? American appetite, European appetite for cars that were on the expensive side to run, performance cars, gas guzzlers. Priorities started to shift away from that, okay, whether it was muscle cars or sports cars. There was a pivot globally into more fuel-efficient economy cars. Number one, all under the lens, okay, and the primary driver, if you will, of the oil crisis. And there's books written on that, right? We're not going to get into all that boring stuff. We're talking about macroeconomic conditions that really killed the sports car. The original sports car, the Roadster, that front engine, rear wheel drive, convertible, light, tossable, affordable car. The other thing is, growing trends globally towards more safety in motoring. The automotive industry was changing in the 1970s. It was going through a transformation, a period of transformation, perhaps a tumultuous time, a difficult time economically, macroeconomic conditions, but then also a push, consumer demand and regulatory demand for more safety. So what did that mean to our light, tossable, fun, low-cost sports cars like the MGB, the Triumphs, the Fiats, the Lotuses? Now we're looking at something that's more expensive. Now we're looking at emissions, the rise of emissions, catalyst, smog pumps, catalytic converters, all of the smog control and emissions, EPA requirements here in the United States. This did a couple things. One, it choked the performance incredibly on cars in that era. We're talking 1970s through 1980s. Are you kidding me? We almost joke and laugh about it. The big muscle cars with 110 horsepower. Camaros with 115 horsepower. Come on. You know, the other factor here is that drove the price up. The economics no longer worked for these little sports cars like the MGB, and they were going the way of the dinosaur. Another thing in the US and other places, driven by safety concerns and regulatory concerns, convertibles were on the verge of being outlawed. I don't think convertibles were ever fully outlawed and banned in the United States. But for example, you saw Porsche implement the Targa Top. The whole reason for the Targa Top was to get around potential restrictions on convertibles. Okay? So cars like the MGB, okay, the Triumphs, the Fiats, the Lotuses, we're becoming outmodes. We're becoming dinosaurs. We're seeing the end of the tunnel, and it wasn't a light. It was the end of the tunnel, the end of the line, the end of an era. Okay? So that kind of sets the stage coming out of the 70s and then into the 80s and where we were at, right, in the automotive industry as a sports car guy, as an automotive enthusiast. This is what we were facing, right? All of these conditions. Now, let's talk about Mazda. What an incredible story. This is not a history lesson, but let's talk about it. World War II, so much suffering and just, global instability across nations, including Japan. Hiroshima, perhaps ground zero, if you will. We won't get into all the detail, but particularly for the conclusion of World War II. We know what happened in Hiroshima. How about the Mazda plant in Hiroshima, which history says was used as a makeshift hospital to treat those suffering and wounded from, the final bombing in Hiroshima? Okay? But even coming out of those ashes and all of that terrible suffering in Japan at the conclusion of World War II is an incredible story of resilience and one that we can celebrate. Incredible what Mazda did between the conclusion of World War II through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and into the early 80s, producing and exporting a growing and thriving inventory of consumer vehicles. Okay? Including the 323, the 626, the MPV, the RX-7. The RX-7, arguably a sports car. But does the RX-7, going back to what, 1978, late 70s when it came out? Shout out to my buddy Jim, who's one of the original RX-7 enthusiasts that I remember from back in the day, from my generation anyway. Guys, the RX-7 doesn't check all those boxes that I mentioned earlier. Lightweight, low cost, okay? RX-7 was not available as a ragtop convertible. All of these things, didn't meet the category and criteria of the lightweight sport. LWS, there's a key term. Now, we can tell the story of the RX-7 on another day, but let's put a pin in it for now. Let's keep going. On the heels of all of this success that Mazda was having, chance. Let's talk about chance. In a chance meeting between a couple of important folks in the lore of automotive history, and particularly related to the Miata, our hero tonight, Bob Hall, automotive journalist, met Mr. Yamamoto from Mazda. And in discussions, I'm moving fast here. This isn't intended to be an academic dissertation. We're just kind of talking about things tonight. And then we'll get into kind of having some fun about what we think about the Miata and the future of the Miata. Bob Hall, automotive journalist, met Mr. Yamamoto, and in discussions, the question was asked of Mr. Hall, an American, what kind of car should Mazda build next? And Bob Hall was a very animated person. And Bob Hall, without hesitation, said to these executives, including Mr. Yamamoto with Mazda, LWS, lightweight sports. We need 2 seats. We need a convertible. It's got to be front engine, got to be rear wheel drive. And he enthusiastically articulated and kind of sketched out what would ultimately become the Miata years later. Okay, what happened next is kind of cool. Mr. Hall was hired by Mazda to become a staff member at Mazda's new Irvine, California Mazda Design Center. So he had colleagues here in the US as well as colleagues in Japan, okay, working on automotive designs. Now, Mr. Hall was not an automotive designer at the time. He was a journalist, but he was technically hired to work on like the B2000 pickup truck series, okay? But as sort of a part-time pet project, he was to work on this lightweight sports car. And 2 schools of thought really emerged within Mazda, which was kind of cool and interesting. One was around rear-wheel drive, front-engine sports car. And then that was the American team out of Irvine, California. The Japanese team was really focused on front-wheel drive, front engine, or rear-wheel drive, rear mid-engine. So just completely different things. So you actually had 3 different designs cooking here. A couple other things, though, kind of getting ahead of myself. Mr. Hall and several other folks within Mazda penned a very important essay, a bit of a report. And it kind of comes back to our focus tonight, which is this report asked the question and attempted to answer the question, what is a sports car to an American? Remember, at this time in the automotive industry, and still to this day, global automotive manufacturers want to get into that North American market. They want to get into the American market and beyond, globally, of course, but the American market is really important. And seeing the opportunity to reintroduce this lightweight sports car for a whole new generation in the US, the question was asked these fellows, and an answer was sought. What is a sports car to an American? And the key output of this essay, guys, is so interesting. Let's talk about it real quick. 1, must have some element of performance. These cars must be zippy. They don't have to be performance monsters, but they must be, number 2, fun to drive. Gotta be fun to drive. It's not necessarily a rocket ship, but it's got to have some element of performance. It's got to be fun to drive. Another key attribute, must feel faster than it is. What were we talking about here with the Triumphs and the Lotuses and the Fiats of old, 1950s, 1960s? Another key attribute, does not have to be fast in technical terms, in actual terms. Like, it doesn't have to be a 180 mile an hour car. Car must be affordable. Very important. Got to have that 50-50 weight balance, right? Got to be tossable. All of these things. This essay, what is a sports car to an American? So I claim, as we were talking about at the top of tonight's episode, guys, what is a sports car? I think they got the definition right. You leave me those comments. You tell me if that doesn't nail it, because I think it does. In terms of pure play, what is a sports car? I hear guys say all the time, well, Ferrari makes sports cars. Lamborghini, Aston Martin, McLaren's. Not really. Not by that definition. The Miata is a modern sports car. Getting ahead of ourselves, but having fun tonight. I'm hoping you guys are having fun. Let's keep going. Primary design inspiration. Guys, let's look at this. Look at this thing, the Lotus Elan. When we talk about the history of the Mazda Miata, we have to talk about the Lotus Elan. If you don't think you can trace the lineage in design cues from the Mazda Miata to the Lotus Elan, look again. Check out the headlights. Look at the wheels. Soft top convertible. Engine out front, rear wheel drive, lightweight, manual transmission, tossable. Not a fast car, but a car that feels faster than it is. Okay? A car that's fun to drive, a car that's attainable. Look at this thing. It's the Miata from England from a previous generation. How do you like that? Design engineers working on the Miata from both Japan as well as the US took inspiration from the Lotus Elan. So, for all of you folks that are Mazda Miata enthusiasts, check out the Lotus Elan if you want to know where your heritage really is. So many 1950s, 60s, and early 70s roadsters. The Lotus Elan is a perfect example of where you can trace that Miata lineage and history to. It's a fascinating story. Guys, let's keep going because now we're getting up to the good stuff. And you know, on this channel, we got that real gearhead talk and we like looking at things together. So let's take a look at what these guys came up with. Absolutely fantastic. Did they get it right? You better believe it. Here it is, first generation Mazda Miata. Okay, came to market as a 1989 model. This car had about 115 horsepower. This car had the engine from the 323 with some modifications. You're talking about approximately $14,000 MSRP. Now, let me tell you something about the Miata. And guys out there who are automotive enthusiasts today and you're actively watching the market and buying and selling cars, when these cars came out in 1989, this was the hot car. For all the reasons I mentioned earlier, there was nothing else in the market like this in the US. Okay? There were waiting lists. These cars were in demand. And hello, knock, knock, guess what? Many dealers were selling these above MSRP. Now, I'll tell you a story. Your buddy CJ, 1989, I was working up in Connecticut at an appliance store of all things. I was loading and unloading televisions and refrigerators and sweeping floors. I was driving my 1983 Pontiac Grand Prix. And I was a young car guy. My boss at that appliance store was a bit of an enthusiast, I suppose. He bought a 1989 Mazda Miata. It was in that champagne gold color. Some of you remember that. And many people who came into that store came in and surrounded his car and wanted to talk about it. So I know for some of you, maybe that's hard to comprehend. Like, hey, I see Miatas every day. Who cares? Let me tell you something. The Mazda Miata was a hot car. Back in the day when it came out, it was the hot car for a lot of enthusiasts. This was a big deal. This car was wildly successful. This car was a smash hit, far exceeding expectations. These cars were introduced and available with a 5-speed manual. The first generations were also available in an automatic, although let's be blunt, let's be real. You wanted this car in a manual transmission. These cars weighed about 2,200 pounds, lightweight, simple, understated interiors. These cars had the pop-up headlights, okay, only available in the first generation Miata, okay? Between 1989 and 1990, they sold about 141,000 units, okay? After 10 years, they sold over 500,000 Miatas. To date, there's well over 1 million Miatas that have been delivered. What a success story. And guys, let me tell you something else. We'll bring it back to history and the story of resilience and recovery that I think is so fantastic and important today. This car, to this day, is built and manufactured in Mazda's Hiroshima plant, which again was ground zero at the conclusion of World War II. How incredible is that? Wow. Now, guys, a couple other things that I think we need to talk about when we're talking about the Miata. Because you might say, well, CJ, hold on a minute. In 1989, well, you could have gone out and bought a Chevrolet Corvette convertible, two-seater, sports car, yeah? Hard to argue that the Corvette isn't America's sports car. Having said that, let's talk MSRP. Remember we talked about low cost and attainable. The little Miata at $14,000. You weren't touching a 1989 Chevrolet Corvette convertible for less than $37,000 in 1989. So the Corvette being a larger, more powerful, more torque, heavier, okay? You could almost squash a Miata like a bug with a big old Corvette. Corvette looked like a boat compared to that Miata. It's just a different animal, right? Almost a different class of car. And you might say, CJ, it's an absurd comparison. Well, no, it isn't. Because generally speaking, at a very high level, front engine, rear wheel drive, convertible, seating for two, let's have fun on the weekend. They both tick those boxes, but that's kind of where it ends, right? Lightweight, reliable, Japanese engineering, four-cylinder, feels faster than it is, all of those things. Mazda Miata. Muscle car heritage, America's sports car, big old V8. Now in 1989, wasn't putting out those big old V8 numbers perhaps, but for that era, that's what you got. And it was just a very different vehicle. As I mentioned, a different class. So the return of the true purest sports car. Again, we're not comparing muscle cars or sports cars coming out of Detroit in the 60s and 70s. No, what we're comparing the Miata to is the pure play sports car coming out of Europe, particularly Italy, England. We talked about the Lotus Elan, those lightweight, two-seat, tossable, zippy, affordable, convertible roadsters, rear-wheel drive, front engine, non-high horsepower cars. These things were not rocket ships, but they were fun automotive enthusiast drivers' cars. And what a return to form from Mazda. And guys, can we just talk about this for a moment? Nearly, well, listen, 35-year story, 35 years, 4 generations. RX-7 long gone, RX-8, okay? The Camaro's gone. What else is gone? Honda S2000, gone. Came and went. They made over 1 million Miatas since 1989. They sold like 100,000 Honda S2000s. So sorry, Honda boys, you lose. Miata is the clear winner here in terms of bringing back the true sports car, carrying the banner for Japanese pure play sports cars. Okay, the S2000 is an incredible car in its own right. I'm not hating on you. You guys know it's all in good fun. Your buddy CJ loves you. If you got an S2000, hit me up. I want to see your car. Let's talk about it. But in all seriousness, the Miata, just what an incredible survivor story. Let's take a look, guys, because that's what we do here on the channel. Let's take a look at where this design has gone. So here's that 4th gen Miata, and I believe this is a 2019 special edition Miata, okay? But this is a 4th generation of the MX-5 Miata, okay? These cars are still putting out, under 200 horsepower. I think the 4th gen variants are somewhere around 180 horsepower, 150 or so foot-pounds of torque. They've got still running the 4-cylinder engine. 0 to 60 time in these, somewhere in the 6s to the 8s. You've got 6-speed manual transmissions. You've got 6-speed automatic transmissions. But again, bring it back to the purest sports car. Fun to drive. Feels faster than it is. On a Sunday afternoon with the top down, sunshine, and you got your shades on, you're cruising around with your best friend or your mate, okay? Who's cooler than you? Who's having more fun? And whether it's in the mountains or on a beach road trip or even zipping around town, there's no more fun to be had than in a Mazda MX-5 Miata. Absolutely. And still at a reasonable price point. You know, we talked about the S2000. You know, with what do the S2000s have about a 10-year run? They sold about 100,000 of them, a little over 100,000, I think. That car started at $30,000 at a time when a Mazda Miata could still be had starting at $20,000. So if you were a recent college graduate, maybe from a performance standpoint, you know, the S2000 was, you know, maybe it outclassed the Miata from a performance standpoint, if we're being honest, but it was also a lot more expensive, not as attainable. Might have been just out of reach for a lot of would-be buyers. The Miata was still affordable and attainable. Now, gone are the pop-up headlights. You know, gone are the 1980s, gone are the pop-up headlights. Hey, guys, I don't know what to tell you. You know, safety and all those things, practicality. These cars have gotten better. There was a hardtop retractable roof. Not sure if they're still making it, but you could still get the soft top that literally you push it down, you fold it down manually in seconds. Then there was a hardtop retractable roof. Kind of cool, available in the Miata. They've gotten more sophisticated over the years, but still true to form, still lightweight, still tossable, still available with 3 pedals. Save the manuals. Where my manual guys at? You know, the Mazda Miata, the MX-5, is the hero of the sports car. Absolutely. If you look at the history of sports cars globally, the Mazda Miata is the hero car. Real talk. Mazda Miata is the hero car of all sports cars. It's just an incredible story in the history of our hobby. And I love to talk about it. Now, guys, let me ask you this. Can we get controversial? Can we get controversial tonight? All this talk praising Mazda and the Miata. Let's celebrate it. 35 years of the Miata. But hold on. What was this thing? What are we looking at here? Are you kidding me? What is this thing? What is it? It's the Fiata. The Mazda collaboration with Fiat. The Fiat 124. In this case, we're talking about the Abarth, which is a special performance edition. What is it, guys? We're talking about basically a Mazda Miata platform shipped over to Fiat to put the finishing touches on it from an Italian sports car standpoint, including a different engine, including different styling cues and trim. I claim this was a very cool car. Your buddy CJ went as far, I'll tell a story on myself. I went as far as to go look at these. I wanted to rock a Fiat 124 Abarth Spider. I sat in one and realized this car is not for me, unfortunately. But if I could fit in and drive a 124 Abarth comfortably, it'd be out in my garage right now. Guys, these cars had a run from 2017 to 2020. They only sold about 41,000, so insignificant. When you compare the Fiat 124 selling about 41,000 in the total run over the course of 3 years, and then you think about the Miata over the course of 35 years, selling well over 1 million, the Fiat 124 is almost an afterthought, okay? But it is a part of the lore and the history of this, what has become a global sports car, the Mazda Miata, including various special editions, including the collab with Fiat on the 124 Spider and the Spider Abarth. Man, I really want one of these. Leave me comments if you have one. If I could fit in the 124 Barth, I would have one. Guys, what a cool vehicle. Guys, let's take a look at a first generation Miata doing what Miatas do, what the Miata was designed for, designed with the driver in mind. What is a sports car? A sports car is a Mazda Miata, and a Mazda Miata really captures the essence of a classic sports car. Lightweight, fun to drive, affordable, feels faster than it is. Doesn't have to have tremendous performance, but needs to have solid performance. I claim Mazda got it right. What an incredible story in the lore, in the history of performance cars, in automotive history. What a story of resilience for Mazda, for the Japanese automotive manufacturing industry. It's just incredible all around. And we as automotive enthusiasts continue to benefit. Today in 2024, we can go out and buy ourselves a brand new Mazda MX-5 in any spec you want. With the manual transmission, you can get an automatic 6-speed with paddles. They're more sophisticated cars, whatever you're into. Guys, I gotta say, as automotive enthusiasts, it's real easy to talk about all the reasons why everybody respects and loves a Miata. You know, it really is the pure automotive enthusiast car that's attainable, you know, and it's always been that way. That was the mission and objective of the car. And it's stood the test of time for young men and women looking to get into this hobby without breaking the bank. Second gen, third gen, even some of the first gens, fourth gen Miatas can be had at a reasonable price point, and you're in. You're an automotive enthusiast. And who's cooler than you cruising around in your Mazda Miata with that top down? I still like the first gen. First gen to me is just so iconic. Guys, those are some of my thoughts. Came on here tonight. I wanted to talk to you guys about the history of the Mazda Miata. Wanted to celebrate it a bit. I said, gee whiz, 35 years now of Mazda Miata. We got to talk about it. I want to hear from you. Leave me those comments. Leave me your thoughts. Do you have a Miata? Are you a Miata fan? What did I miss? Leave me the comments. Let me know. If you have a Fiata, if you owned a Fiata or have one, I want to hear about it. What's that like? Guys, you know your buddy CJ loves you. I just enjoy interacting with you on Instagram, Hot Seat Gearheads, right here on YouTube, on Spotify, you name it. Guys, looking forward to talking to you on the next one. Until then, take care of yourselves and peace.